Just a quick note before today's show. While we have transformed our entire platform to respond to the ongoing crisis, increasing our production of both podcast episodes and blogs, we cannot continue without your support. Please consider making a donation or contributing as a volunteer to support our active engagement at this critical time.
And welcome back. My guest today is going to be speaking on medical care, specifically indigenous medicine from the Karen population predominantly within Thailand, and she's actually written a thesis on this fascinating topic, the intersection of different types of medical care, particularly for women. So I'm sure this is going to be a very involved interview. I'm sure it's going to get a little bit technical, but as is always the case, we're very keen to learn about things that we don't necessarily think about in our everyday lives. So, Shalini, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us, and I'd like to give you the chance to introduce yourself and your background for our listeners.
Yes, thank you for having me on the podcast and the opportunity to speak a little bit more about my work. Just to begin, my background. I'm originally from India. This is more personal, but I'm originally from India, but I grew up in parts of Africa and Asia as a child, including in Japan and Egypt. And I studied in the US for my bachelor's and my master's. And it was during my master's that I wrote a thesis on the situation on the Thai-Burma border, specifically reproductive health services for Burmese migrant women living in Thailand. And that thesis was basically, it came about because I worked in Thailand, in Mae Tao, Thailand, on the Thai-Burma border with Mae Tao Clinic, which is an organization it's a charity hospital essentially that provides healthcare services to Karen migrants and refugees living on the border of Burma with Thailand. And so basically that's a general background on how I got into Burma as a general professional background. And I'm currently based in India. I work with ActionAid India at the moment. I'm working in communications and fundraising, and that's been my general background for the past 10 to 12 years, I would say. I went to school in New York. I studied at the City University of New York, which is where I did my master's. I completed it very recently, about 6 months ago, so I'm excited about that. But yeah, thank you for having me on the show, and I'm looking forward to speaking more about indigenous Karen medicine, community-based healthcare services for migrant women. So yeah, thank you so much.
All right, so let's jump into it, because there's obviously quite a lot, and I think we're obviously talking about a very technical subject, but I think I think we can jump a little bit into the deep end. Our audience is reasonably on the level and interested in the technicalities. So let's start with the work. So you were working at the Mae Tao Clinic,
yes,
in Thailand. So your what we say, the patients, were you predominantly working with Karen patients, or was it a sort of mix of local Thai and various types of Myanmar?
right. Well, Mae Tao Clinic, it's essentially a healthcare services that it provides healthcare services specifically to Karen and other ethnic minorities from Burma. who live
Mhm.
in Thailand. So ethnic migrant communities. So not Thai, not no Thai patients come in. It's serving refugee and migrant populations.
Mm.
And I worked there. I started working there in 2016 for about 2 years, and I worked in the fundraising department. So I didn't really interact as much with patients specifically, though I was predominantly involved in writing donor proposals and grant proposals. But I was working within the hospital, so I was still within the environment. And otherwise, Mae Tao Clinic, just to provide a little background to the listeners, Mae Tao Clinic, it was started by Dr. Cynthia Maung, who is a Korean refugee living in Thailand, and it started in the late 1980s, from with the student uprising in 1988 in Burma, when Dr. Cynthia Maung, she had to leave Burma, flee from Burma, and she ended up in Thailand after traversing through the jungles of southeastern Myanmar. And yeah, she ended up in Burma, began this clinic with just a few supplies, just a few patients, and it's grown significantly since then. It has about 100,000 patients per year, and it serves about 400,000 migrants living in Maystot and bordering regions. So yeah, that's the general background of Mae Tao Clinic. They provide a variety of services. They provide um, out both inpatient and outpatient services, including dental services, um, uh, reproductive health services, which is what I'm mostly focused on. They provide childcare services, and they also provide child support and education services, which kind of complement the healthcare services that they offer. So yeah, it's quite a comprehensive and very unique setting to work in, because it's, I believe, one of the only refugee-run charity organizations in the world. Is completely all the staff are refugees themselves, or migrant workers themselves, and it's a very unique setting to work in. I feel very blessed to have worked there for sure. Yeah.
I mean, that's actually incredible. I mean, we could probably do an entire episode just on this clinic.
Yeah.
Um, that's incredible. So anyway, I just want to clarify. Did you say that you have 100,000 patients per year?
Per year, yes, who come to the clinic.
That's
Yeah,
that's a
significant.
lot.
Yeah, yeah. They're one of the biggest healthcare providers in Mesot for migrants. So yeah, that's significant.
I mean, that averages out to about 300 a day.
Yeah.
So what are we talking here when you say Mae Tao Clinic? Is this, I'm trying to imagine in my head, are we talking about a single giant hospital, or are we talking about a complex of different centers spread across an area?
It's one hospital. It was originally in, um, it moved actually locations within Maysod itself, so it's actually grown bigger since I was there. Um, but it's one hospital with all the different departments within the hospital providing dental services, reproductive services, um, prosthetics. There's just a variety of services provided, and it's within one location. Though there's also a community backpacker health worker team. We have partnerships with different organizations as well. So Mae Tao Clinic has a partnership with Backpacker Health Worker Team, which essentially is an organization that provides healthcare services in a mobile manner by going into, say, southeastern Myanmar, to Karen State, into the forests, and directly providing healthcare services, including reproductive health services, to refugees fleeing or migrants fleeing from Karen State and the conflict there. So that's more of a mobile
Mm.
backpacker health worker team. Is more mobile, but we do have partnerships, and that's included within this number. Just to clarify, but yeah, it's quite significant. It's a very well known clinic for the Karen population, and really a lot of ethnic migrant populations living on the border region. There, it's a very well known clinic and has done fantastic work. I believe I'm really blessed.
If you have a small clinic that you set up in your house or something along this line, like that, you can rent
Yeah.
a house. That makes sense. But you're talking about a very large facility. Like,
Hmm.
did Maytal build this facility, or what, did it already exist? Did they purchase it off the Thai government? Like, I'm just fascinated to know how you get to that size
Right,
as a
right.
refugee organization.
Right, right. Well, Dr. Cynthia Maung, it began in a one room house, you could say. I guess it was just one room, and it had a few utensils. They weren't even using um, sanitized hospital gear. It was really just kind of whatever was in their hands. Dr. Cynthia Maung was using utensils, kitchen utensils, to partake in like operations and things like that. So it began very small in 1988, and well, it kind of grew over time by getting attention from funding agencies across both internationally and locally, because it was such a unique setting and it was providing very essential services to a very vulnerable community on the border regions. So it did grow. It took time, but it did grow over the years. It wasn't something that happened instantly. It took time over the years, but it's grown significantly since then. It's been more than 30 years, right, since the organization has been operating. So yeah, and the clinic is named after Mae Tao River, which basically marks the border between Myanmar and Thailand. And basically, Dr. Cynthia, she really recognized the critical need for healthcare in the border region, and she really dedicated herself to providing this comprehensive care. And what's interesting about Mae Tao Clinic is that the health and administrative teams, they may basically consist of local community health workers and managers. So everyone is local, and local in the sense of like Karen. So yeah, it's very community owned, a very um, sustainable management style. And in terms of reproductive care, I just wanted to just provide some numbers, because this is an area that's really I'm passionate about, reproductive health. MTC has made significant contributions to reproductive health. For example, over the years, they've offered about 135,000 antenatal care consultations, more than 75,000 family planning consultations, 34,000 deliveries, and this is all since 2007. So if you, this is not even from the when it began. So this is only since 2007. So it's one of the region's largest provider of reproductive health services for migrants, refugees, and even displaced populations. A lot of displaced populations travel across Southeast Myanmar and come to MTC because it's really the only sole healthcare service they can access, right? So it really provides a lot of hope for women and men as well, and children facing challenges and of displacement and like limited access to healthcare. So yeah, it's an amazing place, really. Yeah.
And so an important question is, do you charge for the services? How does that work?
No, it's completely free. We don't charge for the services. MTC does not charge.
Wow. So somebody comes to you with, they like a pregnant woman comes to you, she wants to have antenatal care, or somebody comes to you with trauma, as in like, physical trauma, or somebody comes to you for
Mm-mm.
whatever, all of that is free.
All of that is free.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
all free. The What's provided is very comprehensive. Like, so as you were mentioning, if a pregnant woman comes, there's antenatal care, regular checkups, ultrasounds, monitoring for high risk pregnancies, even abortion services, which is illegal in Thailand, is provided by Mae Tao Clinic. And so, yeah, it really is a nice place for like maternal health and safer deliveries. There's
Wow.
skilled birth attendants. Yeah, so a quite comprehensive variety of services.
I mean, that's actually incredible. Like, if initially when you hear like something like a clinic, and you say, "Oh, this is a medical clinic that's run by refugees for refugees, the community," you think of something much smaller in scope, but you're offering you're offering services, and you're offering them for free, that even in more developed countries you might not have ready access to, or that might not be packaged together in one convenient place where you can get that. So it's a very holistic approach.
It is a very holistic approach, and yeah, it's pretty amazing that they're able to do that. And it really, I mean, it depends on funding. Of course, Maytao Clinic has had periods where funding was not the best, and so they had to cut back on the services they were able to provide. And for example, when Aung San Suu Kyi in the National League of Democracy was elected, there was a general conventional wisdom among donors that, um, well, now that there's democracy in Burma, there's not a need for providing access to healthcare services on border regions, because a lot of migrant populations can go back to Burma and access services there because it's safer there. But that was not necessarily the case. and there
Mm.
were still security risks and all of that, and funding was cut back, and so they had to cut back on the amount of services that they could provide during that period. Um, but yes, overall, it's pretty amazing that they're able to provide free services to migrant populations, refugee populations, comprehensive services, holistic services. They also provide family planning services, contraception. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
And I mean, let's then talk about this other element, because before we even move into the ethnic or also the indigenous health, like the other thing I wanted to touch on was the backpacker healthcare
Right.
that I know you mentioned in the past. So can you explain that to me? Like, is that are you sending medical teams bushwhacking through the jungle
Yeah.
to remote locations to meet people who need a doctor?
Right. Well, that kind of sums it up. Well, I can mention that. Well, basically, how it began was backpacker health worker team. Sorry, it began as a community-based healthcare initiative, and basically they originated in the early 1980s when there were a lot of backpacker tourists in Thailand. And these tourists, they began to see how there was a lot of healthcare disparities experienced by Burmese refugees living in Thailand, and so they offered to volunteer informally to provide medical services and assistance to refugees, and in the jungles, and kind of how you described it, basically. And over time, this kind of grassroots effort evolved into something a little bit more structured and organized. And they kind of follow a very community-based approach. And this is actually what I wrote about in my thesis about how community-based healthcare services is kind of the way to go when it comes to effective providing effective access to services for migrant women. Kind of this kind of they recognize, the importance of community participation, local knowledge, cultural sensitivity. They offer services in multiple languages, despite being in a backpack area in the fields, going through the jungles. You described it so well. And yeah, they really address the specific needs of Burmese migrants and refugees. It's not easy, obviously, and they face a lot of setbacks, but it's needed, right? Because that's a very vulnerable community living in those jungle areas, and they need healthcare services and aren't able to access it. So yeah.
I'm floored at the fact that this is a thing that can be provided. Like, the idea of not just accessing medicine or sending medical aid remotely, but sending medical aid with diverse language and cultural perspectives
Right.
into these high vulnerability areas. The other question I have on this: does anyone, like, you may have touched on this already, but does anyone cross back into Karen State and offer services in the conflict zones as well, or is that outside the remit?
I think that would be outside of it wouldn't be it would be mostly in the jungle areas, not so much Karen state itself.
Mhm.
And they don't just offer medicinal services. They also offer like peer education and workshops and group discussions to raise awareness about health concerns like family planning and maternal care. So it's pretty diverse what they do. And yeah, they play really a huge role in facilitating access to healthcare services. And it's yeah, I was very flawed when I first came to Mae Tao Clinic. I was also like really floored by um, how they're able to do this, right? And obviously, there's so much security concerns, like not just for the migrants living in the border, but the healthcare workers, right? So the fact that I was just like thinking, like, I don't know if I would ever be able to do that and put my life at risk, but like the fact that these healthcare workers are doing some really selfless work and are able to really, really provide for the services to these very vulnerable communities. I mean, yeah, that's I found it just mind blowing. Yeah.
I mean, that's it. Yeah, it is. It is actually difficult for me to process that something like this can exist, especially given that we're dealing with remote areas, we're dealing with very vulnerable communities, we're often often dealing sort of on the gray area as far as the Thai system is concerned. And this is an important contextual question.
Mm.
How does the Thai government and the Thai medical infrastructure relate to the refugee population in Thailand?
How do they relate to them?
Like,
That's
do they offer them services? Do they have access to everything Thai citizens have? You
right.
know,
No, they don't. They don't have access. Migrant populations, ethnic Burmese migrant populations, don't have access to what Thai citizens have because they don't have documentation. So, well, Thailand has, even though like Thailand has long been a destination for Burmese refugees and migrants because it's close to Burma and it's relatively stable economically. Um, so there are many Burmese seeking better livelihoods and safety in Thailand, but uh, there are a lot of challenges. The Thai government basically doesn't provide recognition for, um, well, they don't really provide healthcare services to migrants who don't have documentation. So that's a policy that they have. But to curb this, to curb this, they have tried to provide stay and work permits to refugees and migrants, so temporary stay and work permits, so that they can allow them some degree of legal status and employment opportunities. But when it comes to healthcare services, it's a little bit more complicated. Um, what's interesting is that Thailand also is a non-signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention.
mm,
Um, so they don't recognize that convention, but they do operate on the principle of non-refoulement, which basically is that they are obligated to safeguard the rights and well-beings of those fleeing persecution, and they can't deport them back to, say, Burma, because if they are facing security issues. So at least there's that. But in terms of healthcare services, unless there is a partnership, like Mae Tao Clinic has a partnership with Mae Sot Hospital. Mae Sot Hospital is a Thai hospital in Mae Sot, Thailand, and through this partnership, even those migrants who don't have documentation can access services through referrals. So if Mae Tao Clinic does not have certain medicine or certain services available for patients, then they refer those migrant patients to Mesa Hospital. And Mesa Hospital, through this agreement, provides services, no questions asked, no documentation necessary. But other than that, it's difficult. And a lot of migrant populations, even if they were somehow to have documentation and go to a Thai hospital, they face a lot of problems, right? Because of language issues, cultural differences. They don't feel comfortable being in a Thai hospital because of the legal repercussions that they might face because they don't have all the documentation that they need, or they're living quote unquote illegally in Thailand. So there's a lot of fear. So they
mm.
definitely feel safer with community based and Burmese indigenous community based healthcare
Mm.
services. So, yeah.
And even in addition to that, I mean, you mentioned previously that you provide abortion services, which, I mean, my understanding is they were relatively recently legalized in Thailand, but they're
Mhm.
very difficult functionally to access.
Right.
So even if they have the documentation, they might still prefer to go to the Mae Tao Clinic because you just provide services that standard Thai institutions might not provide.
Right. Exactly.
Oh,
Um, it's interesting. I wanted to just share a story about the illegality of abortion services in Thailand, at least when I was working in Thailand in 2016. I had a colleague from Mae Tao Clinic. She's Karen, she's migrant, and she had to go through an abortion. She got pregnant and she didn't want the baby, so she decided the fetus, sorry, and so she decided to have an abortion, but she was unable to access Thai services because it was technically illegal in Thailand, and she was also afraid to access even these unsafe abortion services provided by Thai doctors. So what happened was essentially she sought out a Karen doctor who was providing underground abortion services. He was technically not even recognized within Thailand, so he was an quote unquote again illegal doctor working in Thailand on an illegal issue of abortion. And she asked me to accompany her to this Korean doctor to get these abortion services because she was afraid that he would deny the services, and basically there's so much stigma associated with unsafe sex and not using contraception among the Korean community, especially when you're so young, that she was afraid he would deny those services. But she said if I was there, because I'm not Korean and I'm a foreigner essentially, it would make it easier for her to get these services. So we went there, And the Quran, he did say a few words in Quran, which I was able to make out was basically telling her she shouldn't have gotten pregnant and was kind of hounding her a little bit. But then he agreed to it, and he got the medicine from across the border from Karen state, um, and it came from Burma into Thailand, and he provided her pills basically, which she had to take, and injections, and she was able to get the abortion. But it's pretty amazing how there's so much power dynamics, and that you have to go through such a process to get a service like abortion as a migrant woman. Yeah, it was really hard for her.
Hmm. I mean, I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm not surprised. As we were
Yeah.
discussing, previously, like I also had someone going through a similar thing, and some of the advice I was given was like, have a man accompany her because the doctor is more likely to do an abortion if they feel that a boyfriend or husband or something is giving permission to this rather than just upon the request of a pregnant woman,
Yeah.
um, which is a terrible outcome of entrenched misogyny. But the the other question, that this might be a little bit difficult for you to answer, but I'm curious because
Mm.
we have an impression, just on this reproductive healthcare, we have this impression of Thailand as a country that has socially and culturally a relatively open opinion and attitude towards sex and sexuality. Of course, that's
Yeah.
overblown among tourists. Like the actual realities of a lot of people in Thailand, they are coming up against much more conservative standards than the sort of international image of the country would suggest. But I'm wondering, the Karen population, do they likewise have this Thai style open opinion, open attitude towards sex? Because from what you were saying, it sort of sounds like the Karen might come from a much more conservative perspective on this. Is that
Right.
accurate? And if it is, like, what does that mean for medical care?
Right. And that's a great question. I think definitely compared to Thailand, the Korean culture is more conservative when it comes to sex and sexuality. Um, at least when I was working in Mae Tao Clinic, the clinic itself was pretty open about it because they had to be as a medical organization providing healthcare services, reproductive healthcare services to women. But otherwise, within the community itself, there are certain perceptions, especially about women, who have sex before marriage, who uh, who have abortions, essentially. So there are definitely some conservative ideas about um, women and sexuality, even men and sexuality, and there's also a lot of I don't know how to say it, like really unconventional ideas about it that get passed on, which surprised me. I remember the first day when I was at Meta Clinic, there was this idea amongst Korean Burmese men that if you I forgot what it was specifically. If you eat a certain food, it would. I forgot what the food was specifically, but it was something that was really you would not expect, and it would increase your sexual vigor. And there were these little traditions or like ideas or that about sexuality and sex, but otherwise, besides these little conventional ideas that was passed down that were not really hygienic as well, some of
Hmm.
the time. Despite that, generally speaking, I would say yes, that it's a little bit more conservative, especially compared to Thailand.
I just find it interesting, these myths and these cultural beliefs about
Right.
specific actions and foods. Like, I don't know how much this is the same with the Karen, but among like many people in Burma, many of the Bama themselves, these beliefs towards women, the idea that a woman's clothes have to be dried behind the house so that a man doesn't walk under it and lose his pone, his spiritual energy. A
Mm.
woman's clothes cannot be washed with a man's clothes. Anything that a woman wears when she's menstruating is especially unclean. And of course the women during the early days of the revolution were using this to shame and psychologically torment the soldiers by hanging up women's clothes and use menstrual pads and things to scare the soldiers away. The funny part being that it worked, but But then again, in the West, we have similar things. It reminds me, like soy, um, as a source of protein. There are a lot of people in the West who have this belief that, well, soy contains estrogen like substances, and if you eat too much soy, you will slowly become feminized, and all this sort of absolutely medically nonsensical um, stuff. So we're hardly immune uh, anywhere from this type of thinking, sadly.
Right. Yeah, no, I actually did not know that. So thank you for sharing that. That was news to me. We're definitely hardly immune, and yeah, I think I mentioned Korean traditional medicine. This is maybe a little bit off track from what you were talking about,
Mm,
but I think there are ideas about how traditional medicine can be both. Um,
mm,
it can be both detrimental to health, it's outdated, whereas there's also ideas where traditional medicine, like herbal medicine, is
mm.
good for you, and maybe that comes from a Western centric perspective. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how people view traditional medicine and indigenous medicine. What's good for you, what's not good for you, and it's definitely a conversation worth having. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the conversation that I want us to have
Mhm.
now, because that's such a fascinating uh sort of perspective. And for sort of disclosure, like I come from an academic household. So my mother is a surgeon, or was a surgeon back in our
Mhm.
home country. We migrated, and her qualifications were not recognized. But she's a medical researcher at a university, and a medical teacher at the medical school here. And my father's an engineer, but he did a neuroscience PhD. So I have a lot of medical stuff around me. So my natural inclination towards traditional medicine
Mm.
is relatively negative, and I think that this is an attitude that a lot of Westerners have. There's a famous musician, singer, comedian, singer from Australia, who Tim Minchin, who has a very famous song called Storm. It's a poem, and there's a part in it where he says alternative medicines, by definition, have either been proven not to work or have not been proven to work. Do you know what we call alternative medicine that's been proven to work? Medicine. And there's a very strong undercurrent of saying, well, if it hasn't been scientifically proven to be effective,
Ah.
then we should treat it as if it's useless at best and harmful at worst. But you're now coming from having been there, having seen this yourself,
Mm.
and you've written a thesis talking about the advantages of indigenous medicine.
Right.
So I'm very keen to understand how indigenous medicine can be applied beneficially, and where the benefit comes from. So what can you tell us about this?
Right. I think it's so interesting that you mentioned that there's a lot of Western perceptions of traditional medicine being unhygienic or not effective or useless, as you said, but as you said as well, by that quote from that man. And yeah, I think a lot of it is Western centric and Eurocentric and has a bit of a colonial hangover, this perception of traditional medicine, although it's not necessarily unfounded because there is some traditional medicine that can be harmful and that might need to be reconsidered because they maybe came about from a time that is not applicable anymore,
Mm,
um, and the belief systems maybe don't make sense now. But I think predominantly, especially, there's a lot of resurgence of indigenous medicine, not just in Karen state, but world over. This
mhm,
idea that you need to get a lot of indigenous communities, whether in the US or in Southeast Asia or Latin America, where connecting with your indigenous roots and traditional medicine and decolonizing is part of the discourse around medicine and healing from atrocities and your own inner spiritual growth and your physical growth and mental, emotional growth. And I think this is part of the argument that I was trying to make that Karen people have a very vibrant traditional medical practice, an ethnic health practice, and it's unrecognized. It might not be scientifically proven necessarily, but science is not enough, really, I think, because a lot of people from the global south, it comes from experience, right? Over the years, from their ancestry, from their ancestors' experiences. in which these ideas of medicine came about. And that's part of the Korean traditional medicinal practices. So I think and also it's also interesting because I think reclaiming traditional medicine for Korean women is part of preserving their Korean culture, especially when their Korean culture has been stigmatized by Burmese communities, by the Burma community in Burma, and also by Thai communities who might see them as um, being different and less than when living in Thailand as migrants. And so ultimately, it's kind of contributing to their self determination in Myanmar by reclaiming this medicine. That's the idea that I have. This is not something I spoke specifically in my thesis, but it's something that came to my mind when you mentioned this. And I think, basically, the argument that I made within my thesis specifically was that community based medicine, whether it's herbal medicine was particularly what I was focusing on, but also myths and practices on um, things like reproductive healthcare services, abortion services, having midwives as opposed to going to a Western hospital, how these kinds of services not only provide a sense of an identity for these women, but also provide safe services as well, as long as they're safe, of course. I'm not advocating for any traditional medicine, but only those medicines that are safe and hygienic for women. Um, but these reproductive health services, they can really provide a sense of identity for these women and also safety, and they're also less expensive I would say for these women because they're immediately available. They're also culturally sensitive because community healthcare workers, members of the community themselves, Korean community themselves, are providing these services, so language isn't a problem. Discrimination based on ethnicity or country is not a problem. So yeah, IDPs, refugees, migrant Korean women, they um, in Thai hospitals when they go there, mostly Thai hospitals offer Western centric medicine. So really harnessing tradition to meet contemporary needs. It kind of preserves an element of cultural continuity where, within an environment where discontinuity and cultural loss are common for forced migrants. And yeah, so that's just something I wanted to share that came to my mind.
So I want to engage with different elements of this because I'm I feel a bit conflicted, right? On the one hand, when you talk about the continuity, you talk about essentially, to break it down, colonialism. One of the legacies of colonialism has been the severing of traditions, the destruction of traditions, the loss of certain belief systems, traditions, stories, what have you, and this is all over the formerly colonized world, right? Um, so I'm just thinking about the loss of almost all pre-Columbian Mesoamerican codices.
Right, right.
I think there are only like three original codices that have survived the great purging that was done by the conquistadors. So the loss of heritage and history and culture and identity is just unfathomable. And so part of me wants to jump on this and go like, wow, like if we can connect to that heritage, if we can help to undo some of the damage of colonialism
Mhm.
and help to revive these traditions and preserve these traditions, that's a beautiful, wonderful thing that can strengthen identity and can strengthen community. On the other hand, my other question has to come down to cold, hard medical efficacy and the question of, are we objectively getting superior medical outcomes through indigenous medicine, traditional medicine, than through
Mhm.
more westernized international medicine? And if so, what is the reason for that?
Right. That's
So
a great
that's the question. Is it better in terms of the outcome of the patient?
in terms of the outcome of the patient. That is a great question. I wish I had the answer for that. I think I need to do another thesis, maybe
Mm,
a PhD on this. But uh, I don't have an answer for that in terms of whether it's better in a
mhm,
scientific research way. I can say that at least from my own personal experience, I know that like passed down from my family when I was growing up, whenever I had certain food intakes that I would that I would eat, whenever I would consume certain foods, whether there's hing. Hing is a traditional Indian food that is used for stomach pains, and that's something that's very common in Indian culture, but you don't really hear it from a Western medicinal point of view.
Mm.
And there's just certain things, whether it's uh, using certain herb concoctions when you're digesting food and whenever you're consuming food, sorry, or whether it's say, uh, I think I know this is a little controversial, but acupuncture for asthma and
Mm.
a lot of other medicines from East Asia is something that's traditional but not necessarily advocated by Western medicine. But Chinese medicine is also controversial, and but I know that Korean medicine and my own experience with Indian medicine, specifically South Indian medicine, I personally feel better when I take these medicines because it not only has health outcomes, whether or not it's better than Western medicine, but it also makes me feel connected to my ancestors. And this is part of what I wanted to talk about, how spiritual health is so connected to medicine. And that you don't see that in Western medicine, right? Like spirituality is so important for traditional societies. And when you're severed, as we said, from that heritage due to colonization or due to,
Mm.
well, essentially colonization, but when you're severed and you're not able to connect to your ancestry, it really affects you. So even
Mm.
I'm not against Western medicine. I just wanted to put that out there. There's been a lot of medicines I've taken that have done good for me. But I just want to make the argument that traditional medicine can do wonders as well,
Mm.
and we just don't have enough research on it because we have been severed, and it's unfortunate that we have. Yeah.
And I think it kind of reminds me of a story that my mother told me in the hospital. They were giving medicine to old patients, like they were quite elderly,
Hmm.
and they had a new medicine coming in because the old medicine, it worked, but it had really bad side effects. Right,
Ah,
it could cause them to lose appetite, or it could cause them to feel nausea. It could, and if they're nauseated, they don't eat. If they don't eat, they don't have energy.
right.
So they tried to transition the patients to a new medicine that had fewer side effects. But
Okay.
what they found was they couldn't, because the patients genuinely believed in the efficacy of the old medicine,
Ah.
and they didn't trust the new medicine.
Oh, that's interesting.
And because of that, psychosomatically, um, they they would not respond positively to the new medicine. It's very much like the placebo effect. If you believe that the medicine is effective, your body will start to react positively just through this belief. And even within the scope of Western medicine, they found that if patients have developed a relationship to a certain medication, they believe in the efficacy of that medication, it can be very difficult to transition them to a new medication, even if the new medication is better on paper. The results could be worse
Hmm.
because the patients don't believe in it.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand the argument that taking medicine that you believe in from either personal experience or a spiritual perspective, or that connects you to your past, could be better for you, um, because your body will respond well because you believe you're taking something that is very curative, and
Hmm.
is very good for you. But you brought up acupuncture,
Yeah.
and that's a fascinating one because I so I actually go for a treatment that is referred to as needling, dry needling,
Uh huh.
which is very similar to acupuncture. It still involves putting needles into the body, but it's much more specific in what it does. You put a needle into a muscle, and you use the needle to trigger a spasm in that muscle, and after the spasm, the muscle relaxes. And this is a very efficient way to relax muscles that are deep, that are
Hmm.
difficult to access from the outside. And I asked my therapist about this, my massage therapist about this, who administers it, and he's licensed to do it, he's qualified, all that. And I asked him, like, is this acupuncture, is this not? And he basically said, well, technically what we're doing is witchcraft. As far as the medical community is concerned, dry needling has not been proven to work yet.
Ah.
We could not offer this as a mainline medical procedure because there is not enough research to meet the burden of evidence. Even though it works, and you know it works, and I know it works, and you pay me a lot of money to do this to you, um, and it's clearly effective and we understand how it works and I can explain it to you, it still technically does not qualify because we don't have enough research on it yet.
Yes.
And I think acupuncture is one of those things where if it's done by someone who's just sticking needles in based on some geometric pattern or something, it's not going to do anything.
Right.
But if you're putting the right needles in the right place, it absolutely can do something. And the trick is making sure that you have a practitioner who is doing something that is effective and
Definitely.
separating out the good from the bad.
Right. Yes,
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that. Yeah, I think it's interesting how we have this idea that having research written, which is good in itself, of course, having the evidence and the research
Mm.
done and having it on paper that a specific medicine is good for you. I value that. But at the same time, maybe we need to shift our ideas of what entails scientific evidence, if that makes sense. There's also
Yeah.
ancestral evidence, right? And I think I can relate about the acupuncture. Even my sister, she had asthma growing up, and we lived in Japan. I lived in Japan as a child, and acupuncture was very common there, and for asthma patients. And so she did acupuncture. It was very effective for her, and we went to a doctor who probably knew where to put the needles in the
Mm.
right places, so it worked. But I can definitely see how there are a lot of there are a lot of doctors who might not know what they're doing and take advantage of it. So yeah.
And that's an issue that here in the West is currently happening with chiropractic.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't want to get a whole bunch of angry messages, but you know that here's the thing: like chiropractors, when they're manipulating the body, they can be doing a lot of good things, and you can talk to physiotherapists who will say like, yes, well, what the chiropractor has done has effectively alleviated that pain temporarily because you didn't address the underlying problem, but they have nevertheless alleviated that pressure, they've alleviated that pain, and
Right.
that's a good thing. But you also have cases of chiropractors. There was a case a few years ago here in Australia where a chiropractor killed a child by twisting the neck of the child.
Right.
Um, and this has caused a huge problem where we're basically saying, look, we're not trying to say that chiropractic doesn't have value.
Hmm.
It does have value, and there is real medicine at play. But you also have people who are manipulating bodies,
Yes.
and they don't understand what they're doing, and they're not being safe, and
Right.
they can be causing a lot of harm. So we need to start investigating, and this leads to a bigger question that I want to put to you. Do
Right.
you think that there is space, because I know you said let's decolonize medicine, so this might be ironic, but is there space, do you think, to apply the scientific research methodology to traditional medicine, to work with these communities to say, look, let's sit down, let's look at what you do, and let's try to understand what part of it is actually working and
Hmm.
what part of it is just traditional belief that was attached to it over the centuries that is not actually necessary,
Right.
and make sure that the traditional medicine that you're applying, that is still the medicine that's been passed down for centuries, is preserving the components that work
Right.
and is not exposing people to the practices that don't work. Do you
Right.
think there's space for this?
I definitely do think there's space for that, and it would be wonderful if traditional medicine could get more scientific-based research, because I think there is a science behind traditional medicine. It's just been
Hmm.
untapped, and not enough research has been put into it because of the severing. And I also think that it would be important that if this were to take place, that
Hmm.
traditional medicine women are the stewards of this research, because
Hmm.
I think a lot of medicine women are such an integral part of traditional medical systems, and they're undervalued. They're seen as like witches, and like in societies in general, they're not respected for what they do. And I think that if they're stewarding this research and are able to have an input, feel like they have a say in this, it would be really beneficial. And we will also be able to kind of see what is working, what is not working, because
Hmm.
like you said, not all traditional medicine is necessarily good. There's going to be bad apples. So yeah, I definitely do value that.
So let's right on that medicine woman thing. This is this is fascinating to me, and I want to understand this a little bit better because, of course, in the modern and near modern Western world,
Right.
medicine has been viewed as a predominantly male activity.
Mm,
You had to go to a medical school, you had to have money, you had to do formal studies, and women, of course, were generally excluded from this for centuries.
yes.
And the exception being midwifery, anything to do with women's reproductive health or giving birth, that would be the exception where women were allowed to play a medical role.
Right.
But in the majority of cases, medical practice was very much a male thing, and in certain very traditional societies where medical practice is connected with spiritual practice. I'm
Mm,
thinking, for example, of the shamans in Siberia,
right.
where medical practice is done by communing with the spirit world to try and sort of heal a spiritual imbalance. Again, in a lot of those cases, it is a male shaman, a male religious figure who is performing that medical function. But you're talking about medicine woman, and that makes it seem that medical practice is a very female thing. Is it that there are two different types of medicine, like male practiced and female practiced medicine, or is medicine as a practice generally a female undertaking in
Mm,
current communities?
in current communities. That's an interesting question. I feel like I don't know enough to really answer that, but I can say that medicine women do play an important element of traditional practices, and current culture is matriarchal.
Hmm.
So, medicine women do play a significant role in medicine. I wouldn't say there are no medicine men,
Hmm.
but medicine women do play a significant role. And it's interesting because I can speak about reproductive health services, like you
Hmm.
said, that at least in Western society, there's midwifery, and a lot of women are kind of steering the narrative around reproductive health services. And you see that even in Korean culture. But you see it beyond just reproductive health services as well within traditional societies, not just Korean culture. And I think the reason why I think what is interesting about that is that there's been a lot of, whether it's due to colonization or because of the Burma majority persecuting the Korean, um, there's been a lot of pillaging and rape of the womb, if that makes sense, like in a spiritual sense and also in a very literal sense. There's been a lot of rape, and so womb based services are so important. And medicine women can play such a key role in that. And I think they're really undervalued when it comes to that, or they're seen as just having that niche of providing reproductive services and are not seen beyond that. But there's so much that they can do, whether it's spiritual health, emotional health, mental, psychological health. There's so much more to them, and at the same time, I also want to say that there are also medicine women who might not necessarily provide safe services, whether it's unsafe abortion methods, providing really unsafe abortion methods. For example, in Burma, for amongst the Burmese migrant population, one of the leading causes of maternal mortality in the border region is unsafe abortion. So, and that's done through medicine women who might be employing unsafe practices. So, it's not all glory when it comes to traditional medicine, but there's definitely so much scope there, and I wish we explored that more.
I mean, look, I absolutely have to agree with that, and I think when even before when you were saying like it could be grounds to do another master's
Yeah,
thesis, looking at this, I was just in my head, I was like, are you joking? Like this is enough to launch a series of PhD theses. Like this is an
yeah,
entire field of investigation that has been criminally neglected, I
right.
think, over centuries. And it almost feels like leaving money on the table to not investigate things that could be working and could be improving
Of course.
patient outcomes.
Right.
So I entirely agree with you on,
Yeah, I
on
think
that.
you just gave me some fuel for my PhD topic because I want to do a PhD in public health, so this actually plays out well.
I
So,
think, yeah, I think this would definitely be like vital,
yeah,
um, and exciting to look at. So
definitely.
hopefully that works. But I'm wondering if you can actually give specific examples, because like we're talking very much in the abstract, and I'm still having a bit of difficulty picturing this in my mind. So what what would be an example of a traditional health, whether it's a traditional medication that Mae Tao would offer, or a traditional type of service, or a traditional approach, other than the general fact that they are communicating in Karen languages, or the fact that they are coming from a culturally familiar background? Are there specific medications, specific procedures, and specific services that are offered that you can think of
Right.
that differ from what we would expect in a more traditional medicine, sorry, like a standard medical?
Right, right. That's a good question. I wish I had like a list of this, I should have done more research on this for my paper. But I can think of a couple. Most of them are herbal medicines, I would say.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of herbs that are found in Karen State or in the border region of Thailand and Myanmar are beneficial, whether it's for reproductive health services or for other um, healthcare services, so healthcare needs, and concoctions of them are helpful. So these are kind of part of the traditional medical system. I give an idea of a traditional medical practice that's not good when it comes to unsafe abortion, where it's essentially inserting an object within a woman's um, vagina, and yeah, that's really unsafe. But it's a traditional medicine practice that has been passed down, and that's actually unsafe for the mother. And
Mm.
so um, those are two I can give. One that's not good, one that's good. I wish I had more, and I definitely need to do more research on this. I feel like my thesis was there was a lot of scope and opportunities for me to improve it, and this is actually one. I did speak in abstract a little, and I wish I hadn't, but yeah, thank you for that disclaimer. I do also want to give a disclaimer that Mae Tao Clinic doesn't only provide traditional medicine services; they do also provide Western medical services, right? Like
Mm.
operations that are providing Western medicine. But yeah, it's a combination that they're providing. So it's not just traditional medicine, but the community based aspect of it is very integral to their work. So that was the argument I was making, where Korean traditional medicine is an aspect of what I was arguing,
Mm.
but overall, it was more the community based aspect where they're speaking in Korean languages or other ethnic languages. And yeah, just a safer environment for migrant women.
Oh, absolutely. And I think like, I'm very just on your thesis. I'm very sympathetic, um, because I also finished a master's degree at the end of last year,
Yeah.
and it's almost a joke within academia that the use or the sentence that we can always throw is, but this is beyond the scope of this thesis, or is beyond the scope of this research. And it's that's that catch-all excuse we have of like, well, I don't have time, I don't have space. And it's true, you don't have time, you don't have space, you can't investigate everything at all times. You
Mhm.
have to put a limit. I don't know what the system was for you, but I think in Australia the general rule is a master's thesis is limited to 30,000 words. You can't go over that. A PhD is limited to 100,000 words. You're not allowed to exceed that limit.
Right, right.
So you have limited space. You can't
Hmm.
investigate everything,
Sure.
unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. I think my thesis was around a little over 70 pages, and I would have loved to write more, but I couldn't go beyond that. So, yeah.
Yeah. And there are time constraints as well. Like you have to deliver by the deadline.
Yeah, there is that, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just on the herbal medicine itself, I mean, I think that there's if you could get a pharmacologist and a botanist involved
Yeah.
to just sort of analyze what are the chemical because there are so
Mm.
many substances that contain or that are contained within plants around us. Some of them are useless,
Yeah.
but we believe that they work. And again, like from the Western perspective, if you go into a gym supplement shop, and I know this from extensive personal experience, you buy various mystical powders that all promise to give you all sorts of wonderful advantages, and you look at the ingredients list, and part of them are coded.
Hmm.
They reference, plants and flowers and things to slip past the government regulators. That's a legal thing that you just have to learn how to read those. But some of them are just referencing extracts of plants that may not do anything, but
Right.
may have, taurine is very popular. We don't know if it does anything. Yohimbe root, very
Mm.
popular. We're not convinced that it does anything, but a lot of people spend a lot of money to buy the magical powders that
Right.
they think will improve their muscles and their fat burning and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
investigating that would be fascinating, I think.
That would be fascinating, definitely. I'm definitely known to drink a lot of herbal tea, so I'm not sure if it's actually doing much for me. I feel like it is, but it depends, right? I think that even Western ideas of traditional medicine is changing. I think like
Mm.
there's become more like drinking herbal tea. I know among a lot of my friends who live in the West, they're drinking herbal medicine and herbal teas. So it's not all gray, black and white. There's a lot of gray areas, and there's a lot of opportunities for like
Mm.
combining the two. And
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of scope there for sure.
I mean, I think herbal tea has been used in the West for a very long
Okay.
time,
My bad.
but it has to be understood the purpose, right? Traditionally, herbal tea is just drunk because you want to have a non-caffeine alternative
Mm.
to tea. But I remember my mother saying that, and I think I told you this in the past, like for the peasants in the village, if you tell them to boil the water for the sick children,
Right.
eventually they stop boiling the water because they don't understand the point of it. You
Right.
tell them to make a herbal tea, they have to boil the water to make the herbal tea.
Yeah.
So we do that, like especially chamomile tea,
Mm.
very very popular in the West. But one thing that I've noticed, for example, my mother and my sister both will drink um, tea that is made from the leaves of the raspberry bush,
Okay.
and they drink it to alleviate menstrual cramps.
Interesting. Yeah.
So there are some herbal teas that have started to be taken a little bit more seriously in the West
Mm.
as having actual medicinal impact
Right.
rather than just having a pleasant flavor.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I would say traditional medicine is becoming a little bit in vogue in the West,
Mm-hmm. It's
but I
making.
would be very cautious because I would also say in the 1960s and 70s,
Uh-huh.
Eastern spirituality, um, Indian spirituality, Japanese spirituality, Chinese spirituality became very popular, and
Mm.
that was a fad. That was not something that was taken very seriously in the West. It was something that became very popular
Ah.
on a surface level,
Right.
but it was not like some people really embraced it, and you had a lot of frauds, and you had a lot of cults that
Mm.
started in the West. Um, the Rajneeshi cult is very famous in the United States. They're actually responsible for the biggest bioterrorism attack on U.S. soil to this day.
Right.
So things like this did happen, but then it just faded from popularity. So when Eastern medical practice, traditional medical practice comes into vogue in the West, I am very skeptical
Mm.
of Western acceptance of these practices because it can be very fickle.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
That's
it can just be like, oh, it's interesting for a decade, and then we're over it.
right. Right. Like I can see that, like the cursory interest, and
Yeah.
also I think it's interesting you mentioned how it became a fad. I like cultural appropriation is also something that I was thinking about. I
Mm.
know in India, like yoga, for example, there's a lot of conversations around how that's being appropriated by the West, and how Indians are not able to be the voice behind these yoga centers. And that's kind of the argument I was also making about your question about how if there was scope for Western medicine to integrate with traditional medicine and also kind of give some scientific evidence of the traditional medicine, what's
Mm.
good, what's bad. I think it is really important for traditional medicine women and men to be stewards because they've been a lot of times cultural appropriation is an issue, right? And to have their names in authorships or just to have their voices heard and honored and respected is so important. So that's just something that
Mm.
came to mind when you were talking about that.
No, I completely agree. It is a strange thing that comes up in many places. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about the Korean language, for
Mm.
example, and I learned some elements of the language from sources that were written by Westerners, and I was asking him like, well, would you do things this way or would you do things that way? And he said, well, I would do things that way. And I've just gone, but that's so strange because all of the books and all of the resources say that that's not what happens. And he's like, but it is what happens. And so of course the natural conclusion is, well then, yeah, maybe the resources should have been made by Koreans who speak Korean as a native language
Right,
rather than by Westerners who studied it and formalized it
right,
because they were wrong. And effectively what happens is they're writing down things that were true maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago,
right,
and it's just become the solidified understanding of the thing, and it's
right.
passed down from book to book to book to book to book
Definitely.
until it's no longer accurate,
Yeah,
but everyone keeps sharing it.
definitely.
And
Yes.
we're not reaching back out to the original people and going, is this still relevant? And
Mm-hmm.
like double checking with them, because then they would look at this and go, no, that's not even distantly relevant. That's completely incorrect by today.
Right, right, right.
And I think, yeah, we do have this habit of coming in and academically saying this is our way of doing it, and this is my research and my everything, and it's like,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
want to maybe double check.
No, definitely. I can also say that for a lot of books about Burma itself. Like, I feel like
Mm,
there's so much material out there about Burma that's written by Western authors, which is fine. You know, they're researching and they're learning and they want to share what they've learned. And but I feel like there's such a dearth of literature out there by Burmese authors, by ethnic Burmese
mm.
men and women, and whether it's on the topic of Burma or really anything else. So it's yeah, I'd love to see more authorships by
Yeah.
people, yeah, members of the community themselves. So yeah, yeah, just piggybacking on what you said.
No, and I agree. It's this is there's nothing to do with medicine itself, but this is still a
Yeah.
fascinating and important topic, because and the problem is, it's not even that they're not writing the books. Like, I am a Westerner, and I come up obviously very frequently
Hmm.
with this problem of people saying, well, can you speak from a position of authority? Can you really know something?
Hmm.
And generally speaking, my answer is, well, yes. Like,
I
if you
think
know
you're
a
right.
thing that
Yeah.
is correct, then it's correct no matter whose mouth it comes out of,
Fair,
right? Like, the truth is not determined by mass appeal.
of course. Yeah.
And to paraphrase Immortal Technique, um, but then there's also a sense in which, you know, so frequently, like, I lived in Burma, right?
Hmm.
I understand the culture, and then there might be a tiny thing that I'm like, I don't know what, and I call my Burmese friends, like, what is this? And like, oh yeah, yeah, this is this tradition. Like, we all sang this song as children, and so this is a reference to this other thing, and I'm like, I've never heard of this, because I didn't grow up there. I don't know the children's songs. I don't know the stories they got told at bedtime. I don't
Fair.
know these references. I've never heard of these things. So there is always going to be an absence of this. I've never been to a Burmese funeral. So
Hmm.
when Mohinga became a meme in Burma, the smell of Mohinga coming from military bases,
Right.
being the symbol that the military are losing a lot of soldiers, that because they're cooking so much Mohinga for the funeral ceremonies.
Hmm.
Because I'd never gone to a funeral, that I didn't think to automatically associate that.
Interesting. Okay, I
Um,
didn't know that. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
but to them it does, and I think ultimately it comes down to this issue that you do have ethnic minorities who are trying to talk about these things. You do have Burmese people trying to talk about these things, but they just don't get given the same platform.
Yes.
They don't get given the doors are not opened for them
Mm-hmm.
to say what they need to say
Right.
in a way that will reach an audience.
Mm. Well,
And
Insight
yeah,
Myanmar is doing a wonderful job at providing that platform. I just wanted to say.
I mean, we appreciate it, and we really are trying. But even even for us, it can be difficult. Like, if you just look at our platform, we have an English language platform and we have a Myanmar language platform,
Yeah.
and those two platforms are quite different, and they have different listeners and different audiences, different guests, different everything. And the goal, the dream, would be to be able to take someone who is a Burmese speaker only,
Mm.
who has brilliant things to say, amazing insights, and be able to bring their voice to this much broader English speaking audience. Like, that would be the gold standard. That would be the dream that we're thinking about in the background. How can we make this happen?
Right.
And it's hard to do that, but if people aren't even interested in trying to find a way,
Mm.
then we're never going to get anywhere. And I agree. Like, what you're talking about, these medicine women, I could already see it,
Yeah.
that their names would be completely left off the publications, because, well, they're just peasant people in some refugee camp. They don't have publications. They don't need to be on an academic paper.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, 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 no. That's not how this works. Like, your research came 90% from this person.
Exactly.
They belong on the paper. It's like climbing Mount Everest and not mentioning Tenzing Norgay, who did the hard yards. It's like,
That's a great
dude, you
analogy.
weren't the first. Like, the Sherpa's already done this. Calm
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
So yeah, I completely agree with the perspective you're bringing in, and if it can be done, if this research can be done in a way that is going to include the custodians of this tradition and of this knowledge,
Yeah.
and gives them, because then we can have a two-way street. Then
Mm.
traditional medicine can be welcomed into standard medicine, because the custodians of traditional medicine are not being arrogantly excluded
Right.
from the research. They can be part of it, and there can be genuine two-directional exchange
Right.
instead of just extracting the information from them.
That's a great word. Extracting
Yeah.
was how it was done. Now we need to change that for sure. Yep.
Mm, absolutely. So, yeah, I think the possibilities for research are endless,
And
and I think the advantages that could come are impressive.
mm,
But let's jump forward then. Let's jump forward then.
for sure.
So you're in you're in India now,
Yes, I am. I am in New Delhi.
and yeah, so things over there are a little bit different, but you still have contact with the Burmese population. So I believe you're working with Action Aid India currently.
Yes, I am working with Action Aid India, but I'm still doing a few consultancies with
Hmm.
community-based women's organizations in Thailand and Burma. So that's Kachin Women's Association Thailand and Mon Women's Organization. I'm doing consultancies with them, and I'm also consulting with Finnish Refugee Council in Yangon. So yeah, I'm trying to stay connected to Burma. I write a few articles for Democratic Voice of Burma and some other news sources on the issue of Myanmar. And I've also written about India's relationship with Myanmar and the Myanmar refugee population living in India, which is another unique perspective and probably
Hmm.
a conversation for another day or even a little bit now. But yeah, I'm still keeping my contacts. Yes.
Yeah. So just curious, like you're in touch with a lot of these um, sort of ethnic communities
Mm,
through Thailand. I'm wondering, do you see similarities between, because you said you're in contact with, what was it, the obviously the Karen, obviously the Kachin,
yeah. And
did you say the Mon?
yeah.
Yeah. Do you see similarities in how these community organizations operate, or do you find that each one of them has a totally different approach to providing community services?
Right, right. I can definitely see similarities and also some differences. I think the similarities are that there's a very well, I think we mentioned it already, how there's a very community-based approach, and there's this lot of hope, I would say, about how Burma, the future of Burma, is ethnic communities, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
ethnic communities are such an integral part of Burma, and without their voices within the future of Burma, there's no Burma. And all of them are against the military. You know, not working against the military, but they don't agree with the military's tactics and the crimes it's committing. So in principle, what they believe in is the same, especially those Mon Women's Organization and Kachin Women's Association Thailand. Um, how they view women's rights, how they view ethnic representation in Burma. There's a lot of similarities in beliefs. Mae Tao Clinic was a little different because it was a hospital, and so what they were providing was different and more comprehensive, much bigger organizations. So how they operated was different, and they were operating primarily within Thailand, whereas Mon Women's Organization and Kachin Women's Association Thailand operate across the border as well. And Finnish Refugee Council only operates within Yangon, within Burma, not excuse me, not with the diaspora or displaced populations outside of Burma. So a lot of diversity, but a lot of similarities as well.
Interesting. And this is what, so this might be a weird one, but I'm just wondering whether there is enough similarity in their contexts, as we could sort of view them as perpetual minorities. They're minorities within Myanmar, and targeted, the Mon less so historically, but the Karen and the Kachin definitely are targeted
Mm,
minorities under the
yeah,
military dictatorship. And now in Thailand, they're still very much minorities,
right,
and very much outsiders. Is there enough similarity in the experiences that they have that
right.
they are sort of banding together into a collective of community groups, or do they tend to stay separate and not have meaningful ways to collaborate with each other?
Well, that's a great question. Well, there's the Women's League of Burma, which is essentially a league of ethnic organizations, whether it's Rohingya or Mon or Kachin, and yeah, it's. I think there's a lot of similarities, enough similarities to kind of have a common thread of understanding of similar experiences and discrimination faced. Like in Thailand, Karen women, Kachin women face discrimination both by Thai communities as well as the Burma majority in Burma. So there's definitely areas for collaboration and understanding amongst ethnic communities. I think there's so much scope there. And Mon, like you said, a little less because they're not maybe not as discriminated against as Kachin, Karen, but yeah, there's so much scope there.
Fascinating to learn. I'm just wondering, like, would they have enough power collectively to bring the Thai government to actually trying to recognize them and support them? Because you said that the Thai medical system was making some small concessions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is this because of their collective size and the advocacy work that they're able to do, or are they basically just trying to survive under the radar?
That's a great question. I think they are trying to survive under the radar, especially now.
Hmm.
Um, with the military takeover, I would say that's a great question. I think there is hope for some advocacy level work that can take place for changes in the Thai healthcare system, for example, or even in Thai employment laws when it comes to migrant workers living in Thailand. For example, Cochin Women's Association is doing a research on Cochin migrant women living in Thailand about the employment services that they're provided and what kind of jobs they're able to take and their experiences. And Karen women face similar experiences, whether it's being paid less or facing unsafe work environments. And yeah, I think there's so much similarities that there's so much scope for advocacy efforts towards the Thai government to make changes. I hope that I can't say if that would be enough. I wrote a paper, sorry, not a paper, an article for Insight Myanmar actually on ethnic women's the power of ethnic women during the Spring Revolution, how they played such a key role during the Spring Revolution in Burma, not necessarily Thailand, but in Burma, and how they're essentially the future for bringing down the military government. That was the argument that I was making. So I'm hopeful, and I hope that that is the future. But yeah, we'll have to see.
I mean, hopefully, but it kind of reminds me of a very sad thing. I went to an art exhibition while I was in Yangon
Mm,
that a friend took me to, and the point of the art exhibition was, women's contributions in society. But one of the major themes was that during one of the conflicts, I think it was actually during World War II, and the conflict for independence, there were women's units that fought in armed conflict
mm,
to help liberate Burma. But after independence, they were not recognized as veterans. They were not recognized as having fought. They
ah,
were not given the right to march in the victory parades, and they were effectively just written out of the history books
right.
because it doesn't do to have women doing a man's job. And
Ah,
so they just sort of got completely sidelined and ignored and forgotten. And a lot of the artwork was trying to sort of preserve their legacy and
oh, that's
preserve that
beautiful.
heritage and that history,
Yeah,
and
that's
bring
beautiful.
attention to them. But
Right.
it is a consistent problem where women and other traditionally marginalized groups, it's not only women, but where you do have women doing a lot of the really heavy lifting,
Mm,
but then somebody has to swoop in and take the credit after the fact,
right.
because we can't, obviously we can't have women doing things and achieving things. I'm
Mm,
being a little bit sardonic, but it
yeah,
it is effectively what happens.
yeah, 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 yeah. That is effectively what I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that information, and that is sad. I'm really sad to hear that that's what panned out, and it's beautiful that there was an art exhibition trying to preserve the efforts of these
Mm,
women. And I think we need. I think it's amazing how much art and media can play a role in bringing voice to ethnic
mm,
women or really any marginalized group, as you said, within Burma or otherwise, and they provide a kind of alternative mechanism to expose the efforts of these communities as opposed to just the traditional ways. So I think media plays a huge role, and I thought it was interesting that how I actually wrote an article about this as well, about how ethnic women are how they have a lot of digital agency, online media especially. How they are learning to navigate online systems, especially with the current military takeover, where they might not be able to be as vocal about what they believe in, even though they are and are operating in these unsafe systems, but they're still vocal. But they're using online systems and they're using digital agency and to get their opinions heard. So it's really interesting how there's scope for that in media and art and poetry. Yeah, this might be a little off track about health, but something I wanted to share.
But I think it still touches on the essentials, because your work is much more, it's academic, it's a master's thesis,
Right.
but you're still effectively doing the same job of coming in and trying to highlight the realities and the voices that often get sort of sidelined and ignored. Not as many people read academic theses, but it's still doing the same fundamental job, and making a huge difference. And like, because of the research that you're able to do, and because you brought something that is real and is happening and has been happening for a very long time, but you brought it into an accessible medium for us as Westerners with an academic background. You've made something that's already been going on for a very long time finally accessible,
Oh,
and so now we can have this conversation and we can
thank
have
you
this
for
interview
that.
and so
That's
on.
really kind of you. I would hope that is the case. Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. Thank you for sharing that.
I mean, that, that's ultimately what we all
Yeah.
strive to do. So I think, and I look, I teach my students this as well. I teach academic research and writing skills, and I always try to explain to my students that this is not just collaboration with your colleagues. This is collaboration across all of the human experience.
Of course.
You're taking all of the research that was done by people before you over centuries, adding a tiny little piece to it, in the hopes that the next generation and the one after and the one after and the one after and the one after can continue and have a slightly easier time trying to find answers to difficult problems.
Right.
And you always have to work with this mindset that I don't care about you and I don't care about your work. I care about making the overall human capacity to solve problems better.
Right.
And if you contribute to this, you have done what you are supposed to do as a student. Good, you get your A plus. Um, None of my students get A pluses. I don't do A pluses, but that's not the point. They can get an A. They can get an A. But that's the thing. So I think no, you really have made an impact. I think you really have brought something forward, and opening these doors, like English language is, we don't think of it often enough, but it is such an impediment. If you can take something that's happening and put it into English, it's already much more accessible. If you take something that academia does not respect yet and put it into academic language and an academic publication, academia will wake up and think, "Oh wow, maybe we should look at this more. Maybe there's potential here." So I think, yeah, I think you've already succeeded in doing that, and I hope that you can continue doing that with further research. But what what I do want to touch on, and you're right, we'll probably leave this for another interview, but I do want to touch on what's going on in India, because I do know from having spoken to refugee community leaders in India that there is actually quite a problem. We've understood from past interviews with analysts that the government of Mizoram has done quite a bit to try and protect the refugees in Mizoram, but that refugees are leaving Mizoram for better opportunities elsewhere. Many have come to New Delhi,
Yeah.
and they are apparently facing difficulties there.
Well, I would just kind of provide a little bit of context from what I remember. Well, Mizoram, which is a state in the northeast of India, it's basically home to approximately 40,000 Chin migrants, I believe, based on like UNHCR statistics. That's and they're from Chin state of Myanmar. And well, basically, uh, they share a lot of cultural and religious heritage with the indigenous Mizo population of Mizoram, and for example, Chins are Christians, and a lot of Mizos are Christians as well. So there's a lot of cultural similarities, um, but there's a lot of difficulty because, like you said, because of what's happening there now, there's been a lot of migration to places like Delhi, and whether in Mizoram in Mizoram, there was more of, I would say, a system in place to provide services and ensure that Chin migrants were getting some level of their human rights and needs and basic needs met. But I would say when they moved to places like Delhi or really any other city in India outside of the Northeast, accessing basic services was not easy. Mainly because their status is not officially recognized. India is not a signatory to the Refugee Convention, and refugees, not just Chins, but really there's a huge Rohingya population living in Delhi as well, and and also in Kashmir. So in refugees are not provided the same status as a lot of other countries who have been signatories to the Refugee Convention. And so this affects access to like employment and health services, as we've been talking about. And there's always this constant fear of being told to return to Myanmar by the Indian government, which actually happened recently with a recent amendment to a Citizenship Act. So there was the Citizenship Amendment Act, which essentially only provided legal recognition of refugees who were not Muslim. I would say it's a discriminatory act, and against Rohingya, a lot of Rohingya refugees are facing are fearful. Those who live in Delhi, at least, are fearful about the outcome of that and about being deported back to Burma. But on the specific question of Chin refugees, they face a lot of hurdles similar to Rohingya refugees. They're trying to be resilient, adapt, search for a better life. But they're facing a lot of issues, and that's the gist of what I do know. I hope that answers a bit of your question. And if you have further questions, I'd be happy to answer it.
No. That's basically what I was looking for. I'm just clarifying. So you're not actually working with the Myanmar refugee communities within India. You're located in India, but you're predominantly still working in connection with those communities that are in Thailand, correct?
Yes, but I would say ActionAid India works with refugees in India, including Rohingya and Chin refugees.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not head of that program specifically, so I don't know enough details. I have a colleague who is associated with that program, but I don't know enough about it specifically. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know, and definitely, like as you as you foreshadowed, this is probably a topic for another interview,
Mm,
because the Indian situation is so deep.
yes.
There is so much going on to cover, and I know that it's such a hot button issue that it's a difficult landmine, or a difficult minefield to navigate. But if you can come back at some point in the future and discuss that with us, we would love to hear what's going on the other side, on the opposite border, on the
Yes,
Indian
I would,
side.
I would love to join that conversation. And thank you for giving the opportunity for this podcast, and also any future ones. I'm looking forward to it. I really enjoyed speaking to you. One thing that really spoke to me and actually got me thinking a lot more, especially in terms of a future PhD, but that was the question of indigenous Karen medicine and traditional medicine in particular, how whether what is the general wisdom on that, whether what are the myths associated with them, and kind of understanding more what these specific medicinal practices are, what are the herbs being used, what is the chemistry behind it. I think it's so important to understand this. So I really would hope for opportunities in the future for medicine and research and science to explore this more. I think the idea of collaborating Western medicine with traditional medicine is wonderful, and I think that's something that should be explored more. And yeah, I think there's also, I wanted to kind of touch a little bit about on the discussion we had about colonialism, where there's so much stereotypes about traditional medicine. Some are founded, some are unfounded, and particularly from the West. And to remind ourselves that colonialism severed traditional medicine women and men from their ancestry and their spirituality, and maybe if they're able to reconnect to this and there's more research and more opportunities and platforms to provide them space to understand their ancestry and their traditional medicine, what's good and what's bad, there'll be less stereotypes about it. So I'm really hoping that's the future. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
We'd like to take this time to thank our generous supporters who have already given. We simply could not continue to provide you with this content and information without the wonderful support of generous donors, listeners, and friends like you. Each episode helps in providing access to one more voice, one more perspective, one more insight. Every donation of any size is greatly appreciated and helps us continue this mission. We greatly appreciate your generosity, which allows us to maintain this platform. Thank you. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects, as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause in both websites except credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give it another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.
Ora bayara nanga ya unya na da do ya dalam dia digane za de mana we gara besaya na besaya ho ba yara nanda da yara nanga na yara na ya da yara na poda ba yara na